Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly a deeply unsettling journey into the world of George Orwell's 1984. We are going to be looking specifically at a pivotal sequence in the story where the protagonist, Winston Smith, commits a pretty grave act of rebellion. But what's so interesting here is that this rebellion isn't some grand explosive event. No, it's actually just a physical walk through the slums of London. But that walk perfectly mirrors his crushing psychological realization. So we're going to track how his physical movements lead to some of the absolute darkest, most profound philosophical conclusions in modern literature. Let's get into it.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 5 main areas. 1. The danger of own life. 2. The illusion of history. 3. A fragile antique sanctuary. 4. The betrayal of the body. And 5. The paradox of doublethink.
You might already be familiar with one of the most famous lines from Winston's diary. If there is hope, it lies in the proles. Now you have to understand, this isn't just a passing thought for him. This is the core hypothesis that Winston is literally betting his life on. He genuinely believes that the raw, chaotic humanity of the working class, the proles, is the only force actually capable of overthrowing the party. And everything we're about to explore today puts that very hypothesis to the test.
Section 1. The danger of own life. Wandering into the slums. So Winston's journey kicks off on this warm April evening. He decides to skip his mandatory evening at the community center. And by the way, this is the second time in 3 weeks he's done that. He just wanders right into the chaotic, bustling slums of London, desperately looking for some authentic link to the past. As he's walking, he gets hit by this super rare sensory trigger, the smell of real roasting coffee coming from an alleyway. It's such a sharp contrast to that bitter, synthetic victory coffee the party hands out, right? It actually pulls him into this nostalgic memory of his childhood, at least until a slamming door abruptly cuts the smell off. But anchoring him right back to his dread is his throbbing varicose ulcer. This isn't just a random injury. It's a physical manifestation of his internal tension. The real world out there smells like the past, but his own body is trapped in this painful, inescapable present.
Now, what Winston is doing here is incredibly dangerous. In the highly monitored world of Oceania, skipping community activities is a massive red flag. The party actually has a specific newspeak word for this urge. They call it own life. It's basically the mortal sin of wanting to be alone, of seeking any sort of individuality. Down in the parole quarters, his blue outer party overalls easily mark him as a total outsider. If a patrol were to stop it without a really good excuse for being there, it could literally mean immediate arrest.
And suddenly, that underlying tension just explodes into pure violence. The proles have this almost animal-like instinct for survival. Warning yells ring out, and mere seconds later, a steamer, which is what they call a rocket bomb, strikes the street, blowing up houses and filling the entire air with plaster dust. But you've got to pay attention to Winston's reaction here. A couple of minutes later, as he's navigating through the wreckage, he actually comes across a severed hand on the pavement. And instead of horror, he feels this chilling indifference. He literally just kicks the severed hand into the gutter to get it out of his way. It really shows you just how completely this harsh, dystopian environment has desensitized him.
Section 2. The illusion of history. Questioning the past.
So, as Winston leaves that wreckage behind, he notices the proles intensely arguing over the lottery. Now, this lottery is run by the Ministry of Plenty, and it's basically the opium of the masses. It's a complete sham where these massive jackpots are entirely made up. But Winston is seeking actual truth, not fabricated distractions. This search leads him into a dingy little pub where he spots an 80-year-old man who actually survived the revolution. Winston watches this old man furiously arguing with the young bartender. The old man just wants a traditional pint of beer, but the bartender insists on the party's mandatory metric system, saying he only serves leaders. It's highly symbolic, honestly. The party hasn't just rewritten the history books, they've systematically erased basic cultural standards, alienating the elderly in their own neighborhoods over something as simple as a glass of beer.
Winston ends up buying the old man a beer. He's just desperate to ask him, was life before the revolution actually worse, like the party constantly claims? Did capitalists in top hats really treat workers like slaves? Well, Winston is met with profound disappointment. The old man's memory is entirely a rubbish heap of details. He remembers completely trivial anecdotes, like renting a top hat for a funeral, or hearing the word lackey shouted in Hyde Park, or getting shoved by a drunk on boat race night. He has absolutely no structural comprehension of history. And in that moment, Winston realizes this terrifying truth: the objective truth of the past is lost forever. Why? Because personal memory is simply too fractured to withstand the party's constant rewriting of history.
Section 3. A fragile antique sanctuary. The junk shop return.
Deeply frustrated, Winston just wanders until he magically finds himself outside the very same junk shop where he previously bought his forbidden blank diary. Seized by this paranoid fear that he's drawing attention from street patrols, he slips inside, pretending he's just looking for razor blades. There, he's greeted by the frail proprietor, Mr. Charrington. While inside, Winston becomes utterly captivated by a coral paperweight. It's this heavy lump of curved glass with a delicate pink fragment of coral right in the center. In a society like Oceania, which is totally dominated by utilitarianism, concrete, and endless propaganda, this object is completely useless. And you know what? That is exactly why Winston buys it. Its pure, physical beauty makes it the ultimate aesthetic rebellion. That little piece of coral inside the glass perfectly symbolizes Winston's own desperate desire to protect his humanity and his secret inner life from the crushing eye of Big Brother. Mr. Charrington then decides to show Winston this small room upstairs. It's got a strip of carpet, a deep armchair, an old-fashioned 12-hour clock, a mahogany bed, and most astonishingly, absolutely no telescreen. None. It is a room entirely frozen in time. Winston is instantly gripped by this incredibly dangerous nostalgic fantasy of renting the room out as a private sanctuary, a place completely isolated from the constant, suffocating surveillance.
While they're upstairs, an old engraving of St. Clement Danes on the wall prompts Mr. Charrington to recite a forgotten nursery rhyme. Here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head. Talk about dripping with dramatic irony, right? Winston is viewing this room as his candle of hope and light, but we as the audience and the rhyme itself are reminded of the chopper. It perfectly foreshadows the brutal, inevitable retaliation of the thought police that we all know is coming. Yet, despite this massive omen, Winston makes the fateful commitment to return.
Section 4. The betrayal of the body. The ultimate betrayer. So back in his room at the end of part 1, the narrative becomes intensely psychological. Winston is sitting there alone, reflecting on the absolute inevitability that he will be arrested, and he realizes something profound. In the end, your primary struggle is never actually against some external enemy, it's against your own physical limitations. When the human body faces extreme cold, starvation, or torture, all those grand heroic ideals instantly disintegrate. The body just forces you into survival mode and completely paralyzes the will to fight back. It strips away all your moral convictions. This dark realization directly foreshadows Winston's eventual imprisonment in Room 101, where sheer physical terror will force him to betray the only woman he loves.
As Winston sits there pondering his doomed fate, he thinks of O'Brien, an inner party member who he desperately hopes is secretly a rebel. He remembers O'Brien telling him in a dream, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." Winston interprets this as some sort of utopia, a future of ultimate truth and intellectual freedom. But wow, the horrifying reality is that the place where there is no darkness is actually the Ministry of Love. It's the party's windowless prison, completely flooded with harsh, artificial fluorescent lights that are literally never turned off, just to break a prisoner's psychological orientation. It is definitely not a place of enlightenment, it's a place of absolute, inescapable horror.
Then, Winston's deep philosophical train of thought is suddenly shattered. Seeking a little bit of comfort, he lights a state-issued Victory cigarette, but it just crumbles instantly, spilling this bitter, cheap tobacco dust all over his tongue. It's a minor thing, sure, but this frustrating physical nuisance abruptly anchors him right back to reality. It's a harsh sensory reminder of the decay, the poverty, and the absolute cheapness of life under the party. It just pulls him right out of his daydreaming.
Section 5. The Paradox of Doublethink. Contradictory Beliefs.
Startled back to his bleak reality, Winston pulls a coin from his pocket and just stares at the enigmatic smile of Big Brother stamped on it. And he realizes he can't even tell if Big Brother is supposed to be a protective figure or a cold, sadistic monster. This deep, internal confusion, it's entirely by design. The party relies on this core psychological mechanic, doublethink. It's the ability to hold two completely contradictory beliefs in your mind at the exact same time and somehow accept both of them as true. It is literally the ultimate form of state-sponsored gaslighting, expertly designed to keep citizens utterly trapped, to the point where they can't even trust their own basic logic.
And, honestly, nothing showcases this gaslighting better than the party's 3 central slogans, which just ring out in Winston's mind like a death toll. First, war is peace. By keeping the nation in perpetual warfare, the party unifies the populace against an external foe and burns through resources. This prevents the public from ever becoming wealthy or comfortable enough to rebel.
So constant war actually provides social stability, which means peace for the ruling class. Second, freedom is slavery. The party teaches that an independent individual is doomed to fail and die. Therefore, the only way to be free from individual suffering is absolute submission, slavery, to the immortal collective party. And finally, ignorance is strength. The entire system relies on an uneducated public. If you can't think critically or remember the true past, you obviously can't organize a rebellion. Your ignorance literally provides absolute strength to the elite.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think back to that old man in the pub. If our personal memories are really just a rubbish heap of details, and there are zero written records left to back them up, how fragile is our own grasp on objective truth? Without a reliable way to anchor our history, how easily could our reality be rewritten? It's a pretty terrifying thought to ponder, isn't it? And it's exactly why Orwell's masterpiece remains so profoundly relevant today. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpacked the dark psychology of 1984. Catch you next time.